Great. I'm gonna call this meeting to order. Let me see, could we do roll call, please?
Stanislaus County Representative, City of Ceres Representative, City of Houston Representative, City of Modesto Representative, City of Newman Representative,
Here.
City of Oakdale Representative, City of Patterson Representative,
Here.
City of Riverbank Representative,
Here.
City of Turlock Representative,
Here.
City of Waterford Representative,
Here.
Policy Board Chair Hernandez,
Here.
Environmental Justice Representative,
Here.
LAFCO Representative here, and Vice Chair Beckman Representative. Thank you, Ms. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment on any items not appearing on the agenda? Or on,
No.
we have our consent calendars, our motion to approve, or any discussion? Emotion.
Move to approve.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we have a discussion item, our draft 2026 Regional Transportation Plan, Sustainable Community Strategy Overview.
So today we have Michael Schmidt from Finley Horn, who will be giving the presentation. You've seen him quite often, so I think I'll go. Michael.
Good afternoon, Chair Hernandez and committee. So today we're going to provide an overview of the draft RTP SCS. So this is most of the materials that you'll find in the draft version that gets released over the summer. Just click the slide. So just for an overview, I'm just going to cover, these are kind of almost, if you want to think about it, like the chapters that are going to be included in the RTP. So it's going to have, the goals, it's going to cover public outreach, the scenario development process we talked about previously, the results of that analysis. There'll be a chapter on multimodal active transportation. We're going to talk a little bit about the transit plan update today too. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the study that Stan RTA is leading concurrently with this one. We'll talk about the revenue and cost projections because the plan is required to be fiscally constrained. We'll talk about environmental justice, conformity, and air quality. And we're going to talk a little bit about greenhouse gases today because, frankly, we're having a little bit of a challenge in that area. So I'm going to share where we're at on that one. And then we'll talk about the EIR, and there'll be time for comments. So just as a reminder, in terms of the RTP, this is the long range plan that documents the 20-year vision for transportation improvements across the county. It's multimodal. It includes, active transportation, roadway, aviation, all the different facilities. And it's intended, again, to reflect the shared vision of all the cities and the county. And as we've talked about before, it's required to meet several federal requirements and state requirements. So there's several things the plan has to do. It obviously needs to cover all the modes I mentioned. It needs to be fiscally constrained. So we'll share some of the financial information with you today. It also needs to meet the requirements for an MPO. And there's a checklist that Caltrans puts out. So when we go through this process, we have to check every one of the boxes and give a page number that it's located to. And then we have to deal with greenhouse gases, which again, we're going to talk about for a moment today because that's become a challenge for us. And then we've got to do CEQA. So we also have an environmental impact report that's being prepared. You'll remember at the onset of the process, probably a year ago at least, we started off by talking about goals and objectives, and I won't ask you to read the small fine print there, but just as a reminder, the plan's intended to cover a variety of outcomes. In addition to obvious transportation ones, it's also intended to have, improve economic outcomes. It's supposed to think about health benefits to the community. It's supposed to meet environmental justice needs. It's also supposed to provide congestion management. And so there's a lot of, we recognize as we develop these plans that it isn't just about moving people. It's about, improving quality of life and having an outcome that we can all live with. So just want to summarize the public outreach that we've done, and as we're getting to the end, there's really kind of two events left. There's two public hearings we'll really do as part of the release of the RTP. But the goals of that effort was engage a broad cross section of Stanislaus County, both in terms of socioeconomic conditions and in terms of geography, and then make the planning process accessible and interactive and engaging. And so, as part of that, these are the major facets we did as part of that. So you obviously had several meetings with this committee, the Valley Vision Stanislaus Steering Committee. We did presentations at all the city council and board of supervisor meetings. And during those, we also did canvassing, in the nearby community. We've met with city and county planning staff for several times for different reasons. We met originally, you'll remember, to talk about the projects, the project list. We've had the active transportation folks have met more than once to talk about the bike plan, and we've had some conversations around VMT. We also had some focus group meetings, and those were really part of that community enhancement zone plan we've talked about. And then we had a website, which had survey respondents, and interactive map where we collected comments. And I'll just point out that some of this stuff is intended to live beyond this project, in particular the website. There's some elements of that. I think the interactive comment map, we're going to work with Stancog to hopefully port that over so that can continue to live afterwards, especially for the bike plan, because I think there's some opportunities to continue to collect comments as time goes on to make sure we're getting that feedback and the projects as well, so that with the next iteration, we'll be able to start from a stronger place if anyone has any ideas between now and then. So this just kind of summarizes again. So total city council board of supervisors meetings, there were 9. And like I said, there were pop-ups at nearby that, and we did a little bit of canvassing. There were 11 total targeted stakeholder discussions along with the CEZ plan that covered a variety of different groups. We had 7 community workshops, a couple online, some in person, in different locations. We had 13 community pop-ups, and there was a fair amount of it that had Spanish translation as part of that. So pretty good coverage. So now I'm just going to revisit the scenario guiding principles. So you'll remember, like, one of the important things that we do as part of this is we kind of develop this vision for what we want the future to look like. And so it's not just a transportation plan. It's also, we recognize that land use informs transportation. So, we had these guiding principles, ensuring jobs, housing balance, focusing in low VMT areas. So that's like having things in proximity to people that they need, jobs, housing, stores to shop at, increasing access to opportunity, trying to make sure everyone has the opportunity to be successful, preserving farmland and growing infill areas. So those, again, were the guiding principles. We looked at 4 different scenarios, you'll remember. The first one was what we call business as usual. And you'll notice that we actually changed the name of these. I think we had some, like, a little bit of shorter, fancier names, but I think we learned through this process that might have been a little bit of a mistake, because we did one of our public outreach events, and we think we learned from that experience that we had the word ADU in the 4th one, and it got fixated on. And I think a lesson for the next RTP is that we probably, even though these are maybe a little less fancy titles, like, it's easy to get kind of caught if you put the wrong title in a thing. So I think we spent way too much time probably talking about ADUs, because I had a little trouble too helping people to understand that all of these have ADUs, but having it in the title was a little bit of a challenge. So I think there was a little lesson there for us. So again, all these scenarios had, essentially different elements of a land use strategy, as we talked about previously, and they all had a transit investment. And that's kind of one of those key things that's been happening in parallel to this project. We've got the last RTP had a BRT plan in it. And, one of the things that's happened recently with the REAP funding that was that the Stan RTA has been able to fund that study. So we basically, scenario B, which was the transit one, had 6 BRT routes. And we're going to talk a little more about this in a few minutes. Scenario C, which is the preferred one that we agreed to, it has 2. And then the D, which was previously the ADU one, had just the 1. And then, various types of bike plans. But I think we've settled on a preferred bike plan, which Daryl, who's online if we need him, has been circulating to the cities. And then the voter approved major roadway investments. So you'll remember again, like this, and this is just a comparison of the business as usual. So just to remind us, what we settled on, that basically the business as usual last time. This new scenario that we've arrived to, which we called mixed use with job focus previously, and still got the name, but we're gonna lose that. Really has a little bit, it still has quite a bit of the multifamily growth. So we're increasing multifamily. And again, when we say multifamily, that's more about duplexes. It's not really about apartment buildings. So it's more that middle housing we've talked about. It also has, better access to transit than the prior one did. And it has a VMT reduction. But in a lot of ways, it's kind of just an improvement, incremental improvement on the prior scenario we had. And, the key thing for us is that, in addition to serving the community better, it's also going to improve air quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which are important outcomes for the plan. So I'm just going to touch on the active transportation plan, but like I said, I have Daryl online if we need to talk about it. I know he's reached out to each one of the cities and had individual meetings, so probably many of you in the room here have talked with him recently. But basically, as a reminder, the red is up there is the existing network, and the blue is the proposed network. So quite a bit of network we're looking at, and really the focus of the bicycle element of this has been to look for those regional connections. So we're in the process right now of prioritization, which is basically there's been a series of meetings, and I'll show the slide in a moment. But every city has now been met with the team and talked about the specific projects and the specific, how does this align with your plans? Are you supportive of it? Does it make sense for your plans? So that's all occurred. So we're really in the process now of doing a facility scoring. And so this is just essentially taking those elements and prioritizing them. And basically what we're doing is looking at proximity to population, employment, how they fit in with land use plans, equity, and safety. So those are going to help us prioritize those, although all of the projects will be in the RTP. And just as a reminder, we've met with all the cities in the county, and like I said, we've sought input on, how these fit with the existing network, the alignments, the gaps. And so we're in good shape on that. And like I said, we'll expect that final version of that plan will be coming out shortly and it'll be adopted into the plan. Yes.
Are you taking questions at the end or during the presentation? I was just wondering.
This one was thinking about. I feel like we should pause. So that's
Okay.
some questions on.
Sure.
But you want to, sorry.
Okay, yeah, I did. I forgot the public input, but I was just wondering for the prioritization, are you referring to once it goes into the plan, there will be a tiered approach? Or is it just the projects that will be laid out, but with no saying that these would be the ones that we would look to advocate for, to look for funding? Or is it just when you said that they'll go on a I may have misunderstood you. Maybe to get clarification, when you were talking about the prioritization, what does that mean?
I'll let Daryl join, but Daryl, you want to join? But just in a nutshell, it really is just, we're going to have all of these projects are kind of making the cut. So they're in the RTP, so that's an important part of that process. But there's also a need within the RTP for us to prioritize things. And it's because it's just a recognition that the timing of funding and the availability of funding isn't unlimited. So that's just basically a essential requirement. But Daryl, can you hear us? Do you have anything else you want to add in regards to that?
Yeah, the goal of the prioritization process is really to figure out which projects are going to return the most benefit for the amount of money spent. So we're just finishing up the costing process. That'll be incorporated into that prioritization that Mike was showing earlier, where we have looked at population density, employment density, equity, the amount of people actually walking and biking now, all of those different factors. So it's basically going to come down to not quite a benefit cost, but something similar to that, where projects would get ranked in a certain order according to that. And then if the county is pursuing a VMT bank or any of those other funding mechanisms, it lets you guys have some wiggle room to decide what you want to move forward. But there are definitely going to be some higher priority, midterm priority, and then some that are going to just be farther out because there's a lot more upfront work needed to get them done.
And going back to the public input, how did you quantify some of the communication that you got during your engagement process? Because I know you mentioned you only got 101 responses for a countywide project, which is not a reflection of your efforts, but like, how did you quantify the rest of that outreach?
Yeah, so great question. So we do in the final RTP, we're going to have a chapter on this, but we're going to like basically provide the summary data we had from surveys, so you'll be able to see what the surveys folks said, and we'll summarize the feedback we got during it. You know, and basically try to make connections about how this plan supports the feedback that we've received, kind of. So there's this kind of correlation where we kind of say, folks, because some of the things we heard, concern about having active transportation availability, and so being able to demonstrate that the plan prioritizes that and transit availability. And there were a lot of concerns, in the final meetings that we had, like about the affordability of housing. So, we'll want to raise those issues. So there'll be a chapter just focused on, talking about what the community's concerns were and how the plan does to address it. And, frankly, where areas for future work really are kind of left to be focused on. Sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Might be the online.
Okay.
So does that include your one-on-one meetings with stakeholders, the targeted stakeholder discussions?
Yes, well, there'll be summaries of it. There's going to be a chapter, and then there's a deep appendices that has a lot of other materials. So yeah, there'll be a nice summary of all the stuff to share. Great questions.
It may be too, but maybe for consideration in future processes, if like a 1 or a 2-page summary for community members to look at. I know it's like the whole thing, but maybe like certain aspects of it that kind of just would be easier to read, because I imagine it's going to be a couple hundred pages. Would be something to consider for future. I'm probably not right now. Like a summary of the overall part of the RTPSCS.
Oh yeah. So there is maybe hopefully I'm answering the question right.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have there's an executive summary that's and it's prepared both in English and Spanish. So
so should have probably started with that. Sorry.
No, fair question. Yeah, that's a standard thing. Traditionally, StanCog hasn't, just to be clear, hasn't translated the body of the document, but they've translated the executive summary and circulated that broadly. Okay, great. Okay, so we talked about. So yeah, I'm going to talk just briefly about the BRT. So this project's just worth taking a moment to recognize, because it's happening in parallel to this, and it's also funded by REAP funding, and it's going to be used to help inform the RTP. It's like a lot of the things that are going on in parallel. The challenge has been that this started later than everyone wanted, and that was because the state was wrestling with the budget crisis, and so it didn't get funded until much later than everyone thought it would be. But essentially, this BRT project involves looking at several potential BRT corridors. It's also ongoing with their short range transit plan, and it's got, just for a reminder, what, BRT is it's essentially like a frequent bus, that it goes down a fixed corridor. So typically the headway, or how long do you have to wait between buses, would be 15 to 20 minutes in the peak hour. So the idea is it's a really reliable, fast service that is reoccurring. It sometimes has, features like dedicated bus lanes, and, in a really high, sometimes it has some benefits like maybe Wi-Fi or something like that too. Just kind of depends on the ultimate thing. And it typically has some branding and some station enhancements and things like that. So they're very focused on looking at potential corridors for that. And, you can see the goals up there, but it's, the goals are pretty clear, that, it's to improve transit availability and the frequency of it, improve access to transit, grow the ridership. I think one of the things that's recognized, one of the challenges with ridership, and folks, continually say, well, why don't I use the bus? Well, it's not available to where I want to go or frequent enough. So this is one of those efforts to resolve that. So that study is, looking at, 5 different corridors right now. You can kind of see them up on a map. I think they're still in the process of having outreach and collecting information on it, but they're looking at, those 5, which is the McHenry, the Paradise Corridor, a combined McHenry and Paradise Corridor, the Orangeburg corridor and Hatch Mitchell corridor. And obviously for something like BRT, it needs to be, there's some expectation that it's in denser areas because the cost related to it and the ridership needs to sustain it. But those are the 5 corridors that study is currently looking at. And so the goal will be for us to fold some of this into the RTP because, if we don't put it in now, they would potentially have to wait 4 more years to get it in. So there's going to be a little bit of a rush to get whatever their recommendations are in a fashion that we can make sure that they can continue to pursue funding. I think that the early returns is they may be leaning towards a combined Henry and Paradise corridor, but that's not a done deal yet. Do you got a question?
If I may, how does the BRT corridors overlap with the CEZ? Because we went on a field trip to some of those along the McHenry and Paradise corridors as well. So what's the overlap between those?
Yeah, those 2 teams meet regularly to work on that. So that's been kind of an expectation is that they're going to be some type of overlap there because I think to really activate the CEZ plan, there's a hope that they're going to be together. So that's definitely the intent. I think it's just hopefully the mechanics of like the corridor and Stan RTA's plans and everyone else's brings that together. But that's the goal. Great question. All right, so let's talk about money. So, obviously this isn't any small endeavor over 20 years. And so that, basically one of the requirements with the federal government is, and I realize interestingly, like the printout doesn't have all the labels piled on top of them, but looks like the display did. So I can't explain that to you because it's not like that. But basically we're required to have a fiscal, constrained plan. And that's an essential like federal requirement that you can't spend more money than you have planned. And so you can see we've basically, and this is near complete, but it's draft still, is that we're projecting about $12 billion through 2049 with a cost of 9.3 billion. And it's really important to note on this, I was reminded recently, this is kind of like the potential for 12 billion. It's not quite the same as like this is promised or that it's going to show up necessarily. So, you typically like you don't really want it to be like 9.3 and 9.3 because a lot of times it's more likely that it's going to come down than go up over time kind of thing because plans get, but that's just worth noting. So, there's several major sources of funding. You can see the state is about 5.7 billion, local is 4.6, federal government's got 1.1, and then federal transit's got 534 million. And then, if you look at the cost, it's allocated a bunch across a lot of different project types. And there's going to be a whole chapter on this, but maintenance and rehab are 2.4 billion. So obviously there's always been this important part of like maintaining our infrastructure as part of this. So that's nearly a quarter of it. The roadway widenings we planned, safety, for 142 million. Aviation's in there for 81 million. So it covers all the different modes and it's constrained. So I think we currently are feeling good about the financials of this. And historically that hasn't been a problem for StanCog in review. So yeah, sure. Go ahead.
With the going back to the slide, is it the projection cost? Does that also include if there are any funding opportunities that are considered? Is that added on to as part of that, or is that considered? If there's any planning grants or any
Oh, yeah.
any other type of funding that is not allocated to this with these other dollars?
Yeah. So what I'd say is, this is kind of like it's a forecast. So it's also not limiting in the fact, like if a new grant program came out, it wouldn't be excluded from pursuing it. And we typically anticipate some planning work. Yeah. So it's not all construction work. It covers the whole gamut of the transportation, plan kind of. And I think what's kind of most important is often grants or other programs kind of say, well, you need to be able to check the box to have been in the regional transportation plan to pursue this grant. So like this is kind of the being in the plan is kind of the essential. Now you can feel free to pursue money kind of is kind of the key part of it kind of thing. And this shows that you can be in the plan because we have enough, and I'm talking about you as a project, like a project can specifically be in it because we've got funding that can then balance and make sense of it being part of our plan.
Okay, so the projections include those as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and typically, we typically go, typically add some planning uh, projects, but a lot of times also there's, sometimes the nature of these plans is they don't have every single study. Like it may say we're going to do a roadway widening project and it's $10 million, but it won't necessarily break out, every single step along the way. So just some fun facts, if there's such a thing with an RTP. 519 total projects, 178 of them are bike and ped right now, 73 roadway capacity, 24 transit projects. We have only one tier two project, and that's kind of a new thing for the RTP. And all the tier two kind of means is that it's not technically included in the plan. But if we were to have exceed our revenue, we would include that in it. And it's likely also an indicator that that item will be included in a future version of the plan. So it's kind of like, if you want to think about it, the waiting spot. Um, and like I said, it covers the whole gamut of different projects, and they're all kind of categorized and labeled within, and they've been vetted obviously by the cities and the county. So just want to talk about environmental justice for a minute. That's another important element of the plan. And it's like, we have that again, have that RTP checklist. And so Title VI environmental justice are on there, and we got to check, make sure we address all those requirements. And so there's really just four steps to conducting an EJ analysis. So it's obviously first, it's really just pulling demographic data. So we pull, and this is mostly a mapping exercise if you want to think about that. We develop a public engagement plan that responds to the community. So obviously we've tried to do that a long way to make sure we're doing a good job of reaching out to EJ and Title VI communities. Consider proposed project, and we consider each project and its probability of having an adverse effect or a benefit, because we kind of like it's either a benefit or it's a negative depending on, what type of project it is. And then, the idea is if we see a preponderance of issues, we want to look at other solutions to those communities, and that's kind of like, if you think about the classic example of like, where communities would have a freeway split them or something like that. And we didn't, that in the past, we didn't think much about that perhaps or enough. And, so that's just the expectation that's being addressed. So like I said, just in terms of accessing equity and burdens, against collecting the socioeconomic data, we identify locations on a map, and I'll show you the mapping in a minute. And then we quantify those benefits, and then determine, different performance metrics. So we've essentially got a couple of metrics that we kind of say, well, different lenses to essentially evaluate the plan through to see if it's beneficial to those communities. So just a couple of maps here, and these will be far more easy to assess at the scale when they're in a printed document. But, this is basically, access to transit. So this is just really asking the question of, environmental justice is access to communities, to access to transit. And I'll tell you that the new plan increases that access. So it's an improvement, incremental improvement over the prior plan. Show you the next one. This is access to active transportation. So, obviously, one of the things we were thinking about as we're developing that active transportation plan is making sure that we have access to all communities. This includes, and I'll tell you that this mapping includes both the existing system and the approved project. So that the work that we just talked about, that's included in this assessment. So it's kind of planning around that, and that was a favorable mapping exercise that shows good access. And then I'll just kind of show you tabularly, we kind of look at some of these same questions. So we kind of look at, and the way we look at this one is we consider it so by the idea of like, do these communities use these modes of transportation? So how much benefit financially of perhaps those communities getting? So you can kind of see we've looked at the total expenditures of roadway or transit or bicycle, and how those communities are participating in those different modes that I'm posted up there, kind of thing. And you can see that those improvements, that they show how much those, roughly about, depending on the category, it's somewhere around 50%, or maybe a little bit less on the bike one, but pretty good. I'm sorry, the low income one is very good on the bike one, very high on the expenditures on that one, and you can see. And so that just kind of breaks it down. And then on the bottom, we do it on a per capita basis. So that's, the top one's kind of those communities, how much is being spent in those communities in terms of them usage. And then the second one is just really kind of putting numbers to it, saying, so, per capita, how much of dollars is being spent for each one of those individuals. And you can see, that it's got a good balance with slightly favoring low income. Well, I would say more than favoring, just nearly twice, $5,800 per capita. Okay. So those are all there'll be again another chapter just focusing on that. Also, this is just a reminder that as we started the process, we had an outreach map. We've mapped all these different requirements and, Department of Health and Environmental Protection Agency and all the ACS data to make sure those communities were being considered. So now we get into some of the denser stuff, which is some of probably the less exciting stuff, but it's probably some of the most important stuff that the RTP does. And sorry,
Fun.
Sure.
Will the committee have an opportunity to review these EJ plans? It is, they're ongoing.
we can certainly, so where we're at is we're consolidating the final document, and we're actually going to talk about where we're at in the schedule in a moment. We've got draft EJ chapter that we actually sent over to Stancock. So I think we could probably, after the draft of that's done, we could circulate that draft in advance if there's interest in that. Is that okay, Gene? Okay, so yeah, we'll plan to, like, after we get staff comments, we'll send that out to circulate. So conformity. So again, the conformity is basically the health criteria pollutants. So these are some of the key outcomes that we get measured by from the federal government standpoint. So it's carbon monoxide, ozone, PM10, PM2.5, nitrogen dioxide. And really, this is one of those things. So we run we start with that land use model, and then we run the transportation model, and then we run the air quality model, and then we take those numbers and we see how are we doing, kind of thing. Are we going to meet the budget? And so it's this was very complicated. I'm not, this process was probably the most complicated of any recent memory for anyone, because the administration withdrew some of the waivers that the state had, which triggered a bunch of activity in terms of the travel. The air quality model was no longer valid because it was based on the waivers being in place. And so we've had the CARB has been going through a process with EPA. And at the same time, all of the Central Valley MPOs and all the other MPOs that are currently in cycle have had this, well, what's the number? So we've been really dancing for the last, like, I'd say 5 months around, well, what's the number? Is it? And then at first it was, well, you have your own number. And then it was the Valley MPOs were, I think we're going to have a group number. And that was in part response to, on top of all that, the model changed. So it's been a perfect storm of complexity and challenges over the last, like, 5 months in terms of how this works. And it's also very late in the game for all this to be happening traditionally. So the determination amongst the Valley MPOs, the executive directors have come together and said, we're going to have one budget. So the entirety of the Central Valley is going to get graded together. So they're going to add up all of our different criteria pollutants and say, did we make the budget or not? And that is going through process right now because it's not finalized. So it's kind of building the plane as we fly it. So that's where we're at with that. And under that, the Valley expects to meet it. Individually, Stancog was struggling, to be honest, because there's kind of, it gets into a lot of detail, but there's kind of this thing called NOx and ROG, and they're two elements of ozone. And the way they changed the model, it considered certain attributes of Stancog that were not advantageous. So it was almost like a technical thing because we were fine last cycle, but then you changed the way the model works and suddenly we were not okay. And the model doesn't just include traffic, it includes things like weather patterns and, I don't know, car turnover rates and like a bunch of other very technical stuff. So it wasn't even like, some of it was like way outside of our control. Like there was nothing we could do or plan to solve. I can't change the weather, for instance, or things of that nature. So been a very challenging process. But like I said, currently that's the plan. I think it was going through process right now with an expectation that it will be concluded in September. So the timing is kind of a challenge. That also kind of brings me to an update just on the greenhouse gas emissions, which has also turned out to be a bit of a challenge. And there's a lot of complexity in that, but We were planning to put the draft out June 8th, and we've had to postpone that for at least a month while we work through some technical details because we're having a little bit of a challenge getting the greenhouse gases to come together for some of the similar reasons. And part of it has been just the practicality of the fact that conformity kind of has to come first because the RTP is kind of dead in the water with the federal government. And so it was leading the charge, and now we're kind of having to come back full circle and deal with some of the issues around the technical calculation of the greenhouse gas emissions, some of the off-model adjustments, carbs comments, and some other technical stuff. And it's actually going to cause us to potentially make some revisions to some of the modeling, and that's in response to the fact that all this stuff going on. Department of Finance keeps changing its forecast for population, so we may make some tweaks there too. So you may see the plan may look a little bit different than it does as we've talked about it to date in terms of the forecast stuff, just to make you aware. So we're working diligently on that and hope to have that, released in July. And I'll pause there. That's a lot to take in, but just a good status update as to where we're at. But I won't say that it hasn't been an easy few months. Okay. Thank you. So just the draft model off model strategies, and this is kind of what I was alluding to, is like, so we do the modeling with greenhouse gases, and then we take credit for these other things. And it's not just about taking credit. These are super important transportation services and programs that are just important to having a well-rounded transportation system. It's not just about moving cars or bicycles. We also have folks who have unique needs that we need to consider. So some of the elements that we look at that we call these draft off model, which it's just fancy because like some of the stuff doesn't get always accounted for in the model, but we're really interested in programs that promote infill housing and compact development. Active transportation projects, well, we've talked about that. Actually, the modeling doesn't account for that, so we do that separately. We talked about the Modesto BRT. Stancog van pool program, Valley Rail is a part of that conversation. I'm going to dive into a few of the next ones, which is Stannis Cruise, Move Stanislaus, and the Rule 9410, just as a reminder. We're also looking at ITS solutions, so technology solutions. So you think of things like ramp metering or signal systems that help you move more quickly through the system. And then there's the VMT mitigation bank, which is still being considered as a potential solution. So Stannis Cruise, just want to highlight this one for a moment. And I should say all of these will be elements in the plan. So these are things that have been in the prior plan. They'll continue through a few updates, potentially some additional programs. We'll talk about that in a minute. So this is a transportation demand management program. It was launched in 2022. Its goal, like many of these programs, is really to reduce single occupancy vehicles. Obviously it reduces congestion, but the point of this program is to promote transit. Is to give information and promote alternatives like public transit, walking, biking, and carpooling. So it's an informational program, really. It's got a reward program that goes with it that was launched in September 2022. So folks can log their earn points for rewards and I think drawings and things of that nature kind of thing. And it just provides a more sustainable choices, and it's an incentive program that I think that there's been some pretty good success with, to be honest. Like I think there's been pretty good activity on that one. And just, an overview, there's 3,400 accounts, 34,000 trips have been 340,000 trips. It's reduced 270,000 miles when we kind of keep track of it. So, a lot of good stuff there. It's been and it's frankly been a lot of commuter trips as you kind of look at it, which is kind of cool. So, I think, you can call this definitely a success, and it's also a great piece of information just in terms of like realizing, the impacts that your program is having. Move Stanislaus is the paratransit element of this, the care cruiser, vets van, travel training, bridges and pass programs. So, various elements of that Stancog as well leads. The van pool program, and I think this is contracted through Enterprise, and it's basically just a system where vans that have 7 to 15 per passenger capacity. It's a fleet situation, and essentially, I think it's like Stancog or the pays for insurance and I think gas for the month and some other elements of that kind of thing. And it averages 16,000 passengers per month, so highly successful program, I would say, kind of thing. One of those things, definitely. Like I think in the past when we've looked at this, it's more financially constrained than anything else. But it's, this FDA funding source has been, it's been very successful from a funding source. The return on each van pool has been like $2,000 a month, I think, or monthly. And then, $3 million, I think, since the inception of the program, and 2.3 million has been returned, contract costs. So very successful. Rule 9410. This is the requirement that employers greater than 100 have a plan to reduce, commute trips. It's a requirement. It's been activated in 2009 by the Air Board. And it's basically this, similar to a lot of these programs. It's really intended to improve air quality, really, reduce VMT, get people out of single occupancy vehicles. And so it really requires an employer to develop a plan and implement it as part of their operations. And E-Trip is the tracking program. And then finally, we've talked about this before. This is something that's, still working its way through, and we'll have further conversations about this as we get into the more of the project that focuses just on VMT mitigation. And this is one of this strategy includes several different elements, one of which could be a VMT bank, if you remember us talking about that, but it's also going to include it's also intended to help streamline cities and the county programs by providing additional resources, identifying mitigation measures that are highly effective, tools and resources. We've got something called Tread Light that'll be available for folks to use, which is like this click and easy click program to essentially assess CEQA VMT for development projects. So that'll be coming too. And I think just wanted to make the point that, as we're finalizing this greenhouse gas effort, there may be the need to investigate further programs. So there's a little bit of a rush that's going to go on at the tail end here, unfortunately, to like kind of look at some other stuff, which may involve, expanding the bicycle and pedestrian networks, introducing car share, bike share programs, looking at subsidized transit passes. I think we've talked about, and that was one of the things that came up during some of the meetings with the environmental justice groups, is really kind of like transit passes or something folks would like to see more of. And then just looking at some of these other measures. And we'd obviously want to consult with those if we started looking at transit-oriented development solutions or other ones like that. But just some other things that may, if the greenhouse gases continue to be a challenge, we may need to investigate some other solutions.
The other strategies already implemented for the VMT, can you remind me if that's conceptual development, or what the status is?
Yeah, so the VMT mitigation program, it's one of the 3 support SCS programs that we're doing kind of in concert. So it's that CEZ, the active transportation, and the VMT mitigation program. And the bike plan is pretty close to being done. The CEZ plan's kind of in the middle and it's going to conclude in the fall. And then the VMT mitigation has kind of been lagging behind a little bit, and that'll be worked on kind of more through the summer. And it's kind of multifaceted. I mean, the end goal is to really just reduce vehicle miles traveled, but essentially it's to look at it's to assess the existing realm of projects we have and figure out which one of them are really cost effective for reducing VMT, highlight that. It's to provide resources to the cities and the county that really kind of streamline CEQA, VMT for CEQA has been a real thorn, to be honest. A lot of developers are kind of been, frankly, very apprehensive about building since this came out, because they don't know, well, am I going to get into an endless CEQA battle because of vehicle miles traveled? Because before, when we used the level of service, like we did a traffic impact analysis, I think, folks, it was pretty obvious, like the process. I knew I was going to go build this market and I'd have to put a signal in or something like that. And I kind of had a feel around it, where VMT is more like, okay, well, you have an impact and we don't know what we don't give you any mitigation measures, and now we're going to refuse your project. And so they've been a little more apprehensive since VMT came out. I think we found numerous examples of folks that, especially in some communities, that they back away from that because they're concerned that they don't see a path forward through it. So part of the effort is to really provide tools and streamlining to make it easier for jurisdictions to implement it, because it's been very difficult, because it's really kind of a highly technical exercise that most staff most of us, when we went to college or whatever, this wasn't on the menu, like, at all, kind of thing. This is a really new facet of transportation. So as to make resources and tools available that really kind of make this a lot easier for both the community and the staff to kind of work through very quickly. So it's kind of intended to be a comprehensive streamlining, identify new solutions, and look at some programmatic solutions, which could involve that bank or not, but assess the feasibility of it. So that none of those things will come to fruition without the support of the jurisdictions. I think a lot of the tools will all be kind of like broadly available, and it'll be like, do you want the tools or not for each of the cities? But if there's a regional bank, that would come to a vote at the policy board. Is that all?
So if I'm understanding correctly, when is the assessment happening for jurisdiction or when would?
Oh, we've already started some of that where we've basically been doing mapping. So we've kind of like what we first start off by doing is we kind of we take the model and we basically figure out where low VMT areas are. So we like to make these like green, yellow, red maps, and I think we've shown a few of them in the past where it's like if you're in the green area, you pretty much know you can build your project without a problem kind of thing. If you're in yellow, you're probably going to need mitigation. And if you're in red, you probably can't mitigate it and you've got a real problem with a project. And so those maps are kind of a starting point and those will be available. But we also pair those up with like an online tool. So somebody could come in and be like, oh, I want to build 100 single family homes on this parcel. And I want to know what my VMT is likely going to be. And they can click, 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 and they'll see like, okay, I'm good, or I'm going to have an impact and it's a big impact and I got to start thinking about mitigation or if I want to do this. So it's a way for folks to get ahead of these questions without being just because a lot of times the process has been for a lot of folks is they have to hire a consultant. It's very expensive. Then you get into the process before you find out that you have a problem. And then it's like, okay, well, I don't even know how I'm going to solve this problem. So I think it's intended to, again, streamline, make it easier for folks. It's in service to the idea of how do we make it easier for folks to meet the objectives of REAP, which includes of providing housing, like at all cost levels.
And so it'll be mandated if and when it comes to the policy board.
Well, each jurisdiction will provide the tools to, and they can adopt or not adopt, just to be clear. So like we're going to provide like a model policy and the tools and things like that. So a jurisdiction, because each jurisdiction is its own lead agency on a CEQA question. The VMT bank would be a regional thing. So that would be require the consent of the policy board because we'd have to identify who's going to manage that and who that would be. So that would definitely go to the policy board, that program. No, that'll be in the fall. Great questions. So kind of the CEQA part of the equation, I honestly, the CEQA one has been one of these things that I think everyone since the inception of SB 375, which started this whole SCS process in 2009. There's been a lot of controversy around the fact that there's a programmatic EIR that goes with it, frankly, because if, as you can imagine, if you're assessing 517 projects all at once, it's the value of that EIR is somewhat limited because it doesn't really tell you a lot of detail about any one of them. But it's again, it's a requirement that goes along with this, and so CEQA basically says you've got to disclose environmental impacts, consider feasible mitigations, and enhance public participation to that. But again, this is a programmatic EIR, so it's not a project level one. So it's not really necessarily like a tiering document, So just to make that clear. And I already touched this, but it's broad, comprehensive evaluation, covers many actions. And it'll consider, the alternatives to the project, and it'll also consider the no project, which was A, if you'll remember, because that was what we were already locked onto. I'll just tell you, like up front, we're pretty far into this document. It's just waiting on a few elements, but like these are the issues that are identified significant and unavoidable. They are the same ones that were identified last time. And so there's just going to be the mitigation will be limited because it'll be identified as saying, hey, these are individual projects. We'll have to probably try to mitigate these individually. We're not going to be able to come up with a regional solution for geology and soils in one locale kind of thing. And just obviously, so the draft EIR will be released with the RTP and SCS, just so you're aware of that. And the EIR will need to be approved prior to the RTP SCS. So there's a quick thing, but it'll be available for at least 45 days, probably the 55 that we do with the RTP. And so we'll collect comments on it. Historically, this has not been a heavily commented document. Just to make it aware.
Well,
Yeah, sure.
I got a quick question on, so is this group gonna see the draft document before it's released to the public, or how's that work?
Well, I think in the past we've released it overall kind of thing. If there's a desire, we could probably like, we're still working the timing out. Like I said, we've had a little bit of the greenhouse gas was kind of an unwelcome. I think we could probably work with Stancog to circulate the chapters if that made sense as we go kind of thing. Like, because otherwise you're going to get hit with a like 150-page document and like really not a lot of time because we are under a crunch at this point kind of thing. Like, you know, there's not as much time. There is definitely the time when the draft comes out, we can still take comments and make modifications during the draft period, to be clear. And that includes everybody, cities, and, you know, we'll get comments from Caltrans or whoever else, both on the EIR on the document. So I do want to make it clear that that's available. But I think we could work with Stancog to try to circulate some of those drafts of those chapters as we get those together kind of thing. It probably wouldn't be the full appendices, but give you a flavor for that if you think that'd be valuable.
I think it would be valuable for me. I don't know how the rest of the committee feels, but just to look at our project list and whatnot.
Oh, okay, yeah, the project list, we can definitely get all that stuff out to you. This is specific stuff. Yeah, absolutely, we can get that to you. The project lists are sitting final right now, kind of thing. So,
But again, I'd be open to each chapter as
Okay.
as they're ready.
okay, we can definitely. I don't think there's we certainly don't have a problem with that. We'll just work with Stancog to make sure that they're comfortable with it. But I think we could almost circulate them at the same time we circulated them to them, because our intent is as we finish them, we've already finished like 4 or 5 chapters, that we circulate those out.
Excuse me, members of the committee, can you please speak closer into the mic? We're having several requests online that you guys are a little bit higher volume, please. Thank you.
Other questions? So the next steps, so right now the hope is to release the RTP on July 6th. You know, that's obviously going to have to be, we're going to have to track very carefully as we work through the remaining challenges that we've got. The public review would close on August 30th, the overall review, and then adoption would occur on September 16th. It's kind of important that we do make that date. Otherwise things get a little more challenging because December 15th is when the RTP technically lapses. I will just say that almost without a doubt, the SCS process will continue for many months after that. I don't think I think every agency, I think SACOG's still in year 2 of their review, so it's pretty common for the SCS part to go on for a bit.
Working backwards from there, you plan to have it for the policy board,
Well, sorry. Well, in the past, we have not circulated a full draft to the policy board. We've brought them we released it, and then we've had a hearing with them. We haven't released it for comment review to the policy board.
so that being said, yeah, it would be great to get it to this body beforehand, because I would love to report back to the policy board on the feedback that I get from everyone
Okay.
in an intentional way.
Yeah, I think we can definitely, well, I'll work with Gene, but I think that like I said, we already have some chapters, so we could just make an organized way for you guys to, maybe we'll set up a share file site or something like that, so you can just go in and grab documents. You don't have to look for 25 emails, but you can look in there and grab whatever looks of interest to you and review it, and we'll put the project lists and the chapters as they come on. We'll do that.
Do
And
you all need a timeline to get feedback back? That's how I work. I work backwards, or do you feel pretty good about getting it within the public review period, which would be the timeline, right?
Yeah, well, I think if you had any early comments that you felt strongly, like if you saw something and you were like, wow, that's not what I wanted to see, or I'm missing a project or something concerning, like, I think we need to know that way sooner. The projects in particular are going to be the most concerning, because when we run conformity for the roadway projects, they have to be in the model. So if we have to revise those have to be like done yesterday, kind of. But I think we're in good shape on it. There's been several eyes on it, but I say that, and it's 516, and I know that's like, you know, there's still a chance. So, but the other stuff, like I would say that, you know, if you saw something and you had a comment like, I think maybe we'll put a little readme in there that says, send me an email right away kind of thing. And so I can jump on it and address your concerns before it gets published. And then during the draft period, if you see something or have comments, we'll include those and resolve those over the 55 days. Sure.
Can I get two quick clarifications? One, the environmental justice piece, is that within the RTP?
Mhm.
Or is it the SES?
It's a combined document. So it's a little, it's confusing for me to talk about this because basically it's a combined document, and really the gist of the SCS is really kind of this scenario process, like really kind of like that's where we kind of like it really reflects, um, and obviously there's some other nuances that are checked, but then it almost kind of comes to fruition and says, hey, here's what we think our greenhouse gas measures are going to be. So separately, we make another submittal in like September to CARB, and they have like a bunch of like really special spreadsheets they have where we have to like fill out. It's like 9 tabs deep that way we fill out exact numbers in a tab in a format the way they want it kind of thing. And that's for them to internally take it in, and then they issue a letter with comments, and then we start going back and forth. But they're things like, does your travel demand model do these 9 things? And check, 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 check. And so it's that process. Everything that is in the RTP SCS that we publish is the document. It's just there's some technical appendices, I'll call them, that come afterwards.
No, the reason why I was asking is because Chair Hernandez had asked about reviewing the environmental justice section.
Oh yeah,
I
that's
didn't know if it was within this document.
Oh
or
yeah,
did
yeah,
it
yeah.
come later on.
No, we've got a draft already. Like it's already available.
Okay, yeah, because that would be probably the one that I would like to look at, but the other thing, I think that's more up to the jurisdictions by like their projects.
Yeah, what I'll do is we'll paste we'll put a share file. We'll send a link to the group, and we'll put like a table of contents so you can see what they are, and we'll kind of show it. We'll put the chapter. We'll just post the chapter 1, chapter 2, and you can like grab it and take a look at it and provide comments. I just ask that you wouldn't circulate it beyond the committee, obviously.
Anything else from the committee? Were there any public comment or question?
Yes, there was one online and they said, I never heard duplexes referred to as a missing middle. My understanding is missing middle is more like 2 or 3-story apartment buildings with like 4 to 10 units.
I think perhaps that's one definition, but I think we've taken a little more of a definition that it fits within the character of the community. And I think within this community, we tend to think of more of that, not less of the apartment style high rise stuff.
Is there anything? 8. Okay, so there's no action needed here. Need direction. Some of the things. Do you need anything else from the committee?
I do not. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all your work. Okay, we do not believe we'll have a Caltrans report, right? Management report, any member reports? All right, this meeting is adjourned.
Don't need to vote what you do. No, I don't. Yeah. 32 years. It's been a while. But I don't want